Good morning. Today is Thursday, October 10th. This is a special populations meeting, and we will get started with introductions.
Good morning, Brenda Wolf, Board Member, District 5.
Good morning, Sabrina Hernandez, the Recorder for the Board of Education.
Good morning, Maria Navarro, Chief Academic Officer.
Good morning, Khadijah Barkley, Principal on Special Assignment.
Good morning, Evelyn Saim-Lobos, Program Director for The Landing.
Good morning, Inger Swimson, Executive Director, Office of School Support and Improvement.
Good morning, Tracy Foster, Executive Director, Office of the Chief Academic Officer.
Good morning, Danielle Suskin, Legislative Liaison for the Board.
Thank you. And Ms. Silvestri, unfortunately, is not able to be here today. She is dealing with a death in her family, and so we send her our best thoughts and wishes, and hope that everything's going all right. So today we're going to start. We have a couple of different things. I want to start with the informational summary from last time. Ms. Wolf, did you have any comments, questions, or concerns? Okay. So then we'll go ahead and move on to the Recovery and Academic Program presentation, and I'll let Dr. Navarro go ahead and get started.
Good morning, Ms. Mandrowski and Ms. Wolf. We updated the full board during the summer regarding our recovery academic program, but we wanted to come back and give an opportunity for Ms. Barkley to give an update of where we are also. We're following very closely this program, and as you recall, special populations was one of the places where the board discussed this focus and need, and so we thought it would be important to bring it back. So we have an updated presentation for you as we start the school year. And so with that, I will turn it to Ms. Barkley.
Good morning again, everyone. I have with me Evelyn Saim-Lobos, who is the program coordinator for The Landing. So, and thank you for allowing us to be back.
Thank you for coming, both. Thank you.
You're welcome. There are many challenges, of course, I think I mentioned this before, in educating students that are in recovery or that are seeking recovery. Lots of chronic attendance issues, dual diagnoses, family challenges in terms of the stigma attached to students that suffer from substance abuse, the cycle of recovery and then relapse and then re-recovery is a challenge, and then of course the gaps that occur in learning from the chronic attendance issues. And then all of the additional challenges with social media and the use of technology. So if you change your people, places, and things physically, you're still connected in terms of social media and technology to all of those forces that may work against your recovery. So we have kind of streamlined or attempted to streamline, and we're continuing to look at the enrollment process. So what happens first is that the student and or the family is introduced to the program, and that could be from many different places. It could be from the Department of Juvenile Justice, it could be a counselor, a PPW, and what we're finding now with the positive peer pressure, we're having a lot more referrals that come through other students, which is really one of the goals of the program. The family and or the school completes the application and the consent form, and then there is a screening meeting. And we changed that wording in about maybe midway last year from an intake meeting to a screening meeting, because we found that the assumption was that once they filled out the application and the consent form and we had an intake meeting, that they were automatically going to come to the program. But one major caveat is that the students have to be interested in recovery. And so that's why we now call it a screening meeting, because Evelyn Saim-Lobos and her team through The Landing, they go through a screening process to assess whether or not a child is ready for or being committed to recovery. And then if they're not necessarily ready for recovery, we would then refer them to a treatment program so that they will be ready eventually. So like it says there, assess the commitment to recovery, and then my portion is to really work with the school and the guidance counselors and the PPW to assess their graduation requirements and what their readiness is for online learning, whether they have an IEP or a 504 plan, and then having the conversation with the school about the fact that they will need to have a 504 plan because of their challenges with substance abuse. And then we decide on the appropriateness of the program, whether it be coming during the day and in the evening, or just coming in the evening and continuing to matriculate through their home high school. Then I will follow up with the counselor and then assign Apex online learning classes, identify transportation, set up the lunch schedule, and then identify any additional communication that's needed. Like I said, the IEP, 504 plan, and many times there's a probation officer or a social worker or a case manager or a mentor, a therapist, advocates. There are many moving pieces when it comes to students in recovery. We identify a start date and then create a recovery plan and educational goals. Did you want to add anything there? Okay. Okay. And then,
Excuse me one second. Can we just go through again? So you have a student who's coming out of treatment. How exactly do they?
How do they get to your program?
so we have shared our program with the treatment facilities, and so the same process applies. The student and family will be introduced to the program from their treatment program, and they follow the exact same process. They have the application and they have the consent form, the communication. I still need to communicate with the school. In some instances, students are not enrolled. And so if they've been out of school for a while and they haven't been enrolled or they've been in treatment, the first step would be for them to be re-enrolled into school because they have to be enrolled.
Okay, so it's basically a referral process?
Yes.
So they're not coming
Sorry.
I'm sorry. So they're not coming directly from the school referral process to you, right?
No, they can be
Okay.
referred through the Department of Juvenile Justice. They can be referred from it's not always the school.
Okay.
It could be from the treatment facility as well.
Okay, and what's your capacity again?
40 students,
40.
And how many do we currently have enrolled?
19.
So just out of curiosity, have we talked at all with the judges or the state's attorney's office in terms of just letting them know that our program is available so that they can, I had a family member who was saved by the fact that a judge showed up and said, here are your choices. So,
We have, I've visited one of where the judges come together and they have a planning session. So I visited that last year. We could probably go back and do that again. And we also do that with treatment centers. One thing that's new this year is that we are hiring another part-time administrator. And so I will be working with that individual so that we can be doing more strategic outreach, which we've been doing outreach, but it hasn't necessarily been strategic. The outreach that we've been, like Friday, we have a meeting with all the PPWs and we've met with the resource counselors in the school setting, but it's really important that I'm able to go and sit down maybe with an administrative team or with a resource counselor when they're having a weekly meeting. That face-to-face building of relationships so that they understand the process is really what's making a difference.
okay, great.
In terms of attendance,
I just have one question.
Sure.
Okay, you can go and meet with the administration and the teachers and things like that. Is there any benefit to providing information directly to parents about the program, the availability of the program to the parents?
So I shared information with the NAACP Parent Council. Of course, we could do it directly with PTAs. There's nothing, I don't think that we don't have any, challenges with presenting to any particular groups, but go ahead.
I would like to clarify that we just need to emphasize when presenting, and especially when presenting to parents, our program, I'm a little biased, is pretty fantastic.
Agreed.
It's a great opportunity for the students.
Yeah, that's right.
And what we have to offer is truly special and really encouraging for these students. And I we have experienced parents who are like, oh no, my student is in recovery, really, really. And then we have the meeting and I'm like, no, I really want your student to be in recovery, and I know you want your student to be in recovery, but they're not there yet. So that's been the downfall with when we do outreach, just being careful with parents to say, we still have to meet with your children first, with your child before they are accepted. There's the screening process, because if not, there's that
Right.
push to, well, I'm the parent and I can enroll them in school. This isn't just school. It's a specific program for students in recovery.
Okay, thank you for that. But it would seem to me that there are many more students out there than are participating in the program. And I have no problem with you having a screening process per se, but I do think it would be helpful if it were more widely known what is available, so that even if I don't get in, at least I could have come over and talked with you about it, because I may not even know what I need to do to be able to get in, and the child may want to do that. Thank you.
Definitely. So with attendance, we work on daily communication and creative transportation. So just this morning, there were a couple students that may have A, missed their bus, B, woke up late, and we start at 10:45. So we'll, send an Uber and make sure that the children are getting where they need to be. In terms of being there for classes. And then when the students experience relapse, we have peer and therapeutic support for them. With family challenges, it's like, we're in contact with parents on a regular basis, which is part of the wonderful aspect of our program. Our numbers are small, but the needs are great in terms of the emotional support that parents need when a child doesn't attend, or when a child, may have relapsed and they think, it's the end of the world, here we go again. But unfortunately, we just have to support them through it. And then individualized instruction with the students' learning styles, and then ongoing goal setting, and most importantly, celebrating milestones. We do an ongoing celebration, and on the walls you can see, sober dates and celebration of those things. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. My question is about commitment. You were saying the student has to be committed to recovery, and everyone understands the concept of relapse. But what do you do in regard to attendance if you're seeing that you're constantly sending an Uber or a Lyft or whatever? Is that an assessment of your commitment to the program?
No, I don't think it's an assessment to a child's commitment. I just think that we continue to set goals, and we continue to talk to them about, well, what exactly happened. I mean, I don't know how many alarm clocks we've purchased, and making sure that students are getting up and getting out. And sometimes it's what's going on with the family, and referring family therapy, so that what's going on at home is supporting the work that we do and not working against it. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think as long as they're showing commitment to both recovery and progressing academically, getting to the program is just a challenge for a lot of the students, because attendance at their home schools was pretty scattered, and so we have better attendance than they had at their home schools by far.
Thank you.
And so in 2018-2019, we had 42 referrals. 23 of them opted in the day program, and 6 opted into the evening program. I think we did this presentation maybe 2 weeks ago, a week or so ago. We had 10 referrals at that time. 4 of them opted into the day program, 6 opted into the evening program, and of those 4 pending enrollments, 3 of those are enrolled. And so we have a current list of 19 students that are enrolled, and some of them were the 23 from last year. And what happens when a student, so the student comes in, they're a part of the program. If things are not working and we find that they're not committed to recovery, we can make a referral to treatment, we can make a referral to alternative programs, but we always enlist the support of the school, the counselor, the PPW, and the administrator. So we're all having conversations together about what's working and what's not working. So we never have a goal of, giving up on students at all. We just have to figure out what the best fit is for the students. And then, so there were 16 students enrolled, and we have an additional 3. There were 6 females and 10 males, 40% Caucasian or white, 40% Hispanic or Latino, 6% African American, 6% Asian, and then there was an 6% American Indian. The numbers are so small, so when we say 6%, that's one child, right? And then the grades, we have 2 students that enrolled that are attending the evening program, 3 9th graders, 6 10th graders, 3 11th graders, and 2 12th graders, and 96% of these students are repeating their grade level. So when we put them in their APEX courses, the first thing we do is enroll them in any 9th grade courses that they haven't completed, or any 10th grader, so that their first real success is to be on the current grade that they're supposed to be on. And then outreach efforts, going to professional learning communities for the middle school and high school principals, pupil personnel worker meetings, counselors, parent community coordinator meetings, treatment centers. We were at the back to school fair, NAACP parent council and branch meeting. I've attended both of those this year. We're going to the 4th, or did we go? We went to the 4th annual overdose awareness vigil, the interagency team meetings. Evelyn sits on that and she gives updates, overdose intervention team meetings, and the alcohol and other drug abuse advisory council. So we have a presence on those boards. And how can you support RAP? Identifying additional funding sources. We did not receive the grant that we wrote, but MCPS did put money in their budget to be able to support this program. So we are able to, run the program successfully this year, but we'll also be seeking additional funding sources. I know Congressman Trone came out to visit, which was a wonderful visit, and we're following up with his office to see what other resources he has. And then, of course, promoting the program when talking about the school system and supporting local and state recovery programs. So I know you're coming out to film your portion of the board highlights, and I'm excited about that. But just things like that are really supportive in getting the word out.
Yeah, I spoke to our communications department as well, because an article came out in one of the education publications, and it was talking all about sobriety and sobriety studies and sobriety in schools, and Maryland was not listed as having a center. So I was like, I think we need to make sure people are aware that that we do. And so going back to Mrs. Wolf's point about just making sure that people know, when I've talked to several of county council members, they weren't aware. They aren't aware that we have it. So I know we're still in the growing stages, so pushing it too much might seem premature. But that is something that we want to make sure that our funders and our state and local supporters do know about what we're doing here, so that we can potentially get their support, whether it's through grant funding or just their general awareness. Dr. Amar, did you?
Yeah, Ms. Mendes, I actually don't think it's too premature to be promoting it. And so the ideas brought in today are really good. We want to make sure that we probably send us, now at this point, every council member maybe a follow-up invitation to come visit.
That's a great idea.
Because we actually do think that the more that youth and different youth serving organizations besides MCPS are aware that we have the capacity for 40 students. We want to make sure that we identify students that are going to be appropriate to the setting, so that they're supportive of their community in that school setting, and are committed to recovery. But I do think this is a good time, and making more awareness possible is exactly the right time to be able to maximize our investment, because the board has committed an investment to this program, and we want to maximize every single one of those seats.
Yeah.
I noticed that.
So, I'm sorry, I wanted to mention that at Ms. Mondrowski's request, I had contacted Ms. Barkley, and she's provided some information, and we're working on a memo to send out to the delegation, so the members of the delegation, and there are 32 of them. As part of that memo, we're going to ask if any are interested in visiting the landing to potentially schedule some visits for them to come out as well. So I just wanted to add that into the record.
Thank you.
I just wanted to talk about communication again, because I noticed that you have hooked in with at least one of our stakeholders, and many more, I'm sure, but I didn't see all of them up there. So I wanted to encourage you to, consider using all of our advisory groups. Maybe a lot of the churches, they have recovery programs. At least make your program known through them so that, whatever benefit that they can get out of it, they know about. And that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Yeah, you mentioned the NAACP. I was wondering if you talked with Identity and some of those other groups as well. So,
thank you.
Thank you. So if there are no other comments, we'll take this information, and we also probably in the springtime provide, if the committee accepts an update, a written update to this committee on our engagement, how we moved on engagement, and then some additional information on the demographics of the enrollment of students.
yeah, that's great. And I don't want to take too much of your time, but I did want to ask, because while I know you reported out to the full board over the summertime, there were still some questions that I had in terms of that, aren't here, but in terms of kids going back to their home schools, I have great concern with that. So from what I had read in the presentation and everything, I had more of a sense that we were encouraging kids to, when they're better, go back to their home schools, and that gives me pause. So I just was like some information about that.
I think not necessarily. I think for some every student has their own recovery plan developed, and academic goals, and some of them, it is a goal for them to be able to go back their senior year,
Right.
and be at their home school and continue attending the landing and maintain their sobriety. We support them in that. We caution it because yes, we've all been worried about that same thing as a goal. However, we make sure that they stay with us for at least a year if they're going to go back to their home school.
So I was curious if you had any thoughts as to whether or not there was anything in particular, like they just wanted to be able to graduate from their home school, for example, and are there things like that we could be making accommodations where we could say, please know, aside from the fact that maybe, as we go along, we should be having a graduation celebrations, as you were mentioning about milestones and stuff there, but that they understand that if they continue in the program and don't want to go back to the home schools, they can still walk across the stage with their classmates and their school.
We do have that conversation with the parents. We had several students, because they're not connected to their home school, that were interested in going to the homecoming dance. And the parents were very, very concerned about them going. So we worked with Gaithersburg High School. They opened the doors to us. We sent one of our staff members, and I think it was 4 or 5 of our students went to the homecoming dance at Gaithersburg High School as a group. So we really work on being flexible with those activities that they want to still participate in. That's really a rich part of the high school career.
Right.
And so we really try to communicate with the schools so that they have those authentic experiences.
They went together and with a chaperone, though.
Yeah.
I was thinking maybe. I assume maybe somebody
we
went.
picked them up, they got ready together, they
That's
were
fun.
taken together, and then they left together and were dropped off. by staff
I just have one sort of final question. What is the parental involvement? It's a requirement of the program. Can you talk a little bit about that?
The parental involvement, so when we do an intake when a student is starting. We develop a family participation plan, and we ask that the parents try to be as involved as possible. We hold monthly family dinners where we invite the students and parents to come, and they sit together and we work on family dynamics and communication. And it's a fun night, and we feed everybody. However, it's been difficult to get parents to agree to like parent support groups. We have advertised last year multiple times parent support groups, and we didn't really have buy-in, so we're starting up a new series of parent support groups that will be rolled out coming up very soon. We're just trying to find ways to encourage parent participation. A lot of our parents are just exhausted, quite honestly.
That's kind of what I was, not the exhaustion part, just the participation part, because we have all kinds of family structures, quote unquote, that may not be a mother and father, and I didn't know whether if they weren't all that interested in participating, would that preclude the child from being a participant?
No, definitely not. We do have family participation plans where we encourage it. We have the monthly family dinners, but they don't have to only bring mom or dad. They can bring anybody who's supporting them in their sobriety.
Okay.
So it can be an aunt, an uncle, a cousin, a girlfriend,
That's good to know, because some of them I know just don't have the family support.
Correct.
So.
And we understand that where that's
Thank you.
And then my one other point is, well, I have two little things. Our alternative programs, as we've changed that, just making sure that our students are aware that even if they feel like they're ready to make a change, there are other options other than the overall comprehensive high school.
Yeah, so I am in touch with Steve Neff, and so last year I made a couple of referrals, and they were successful in transitioning to the alternative program.
Great.
But he allows me to utilize the PPW at the home school, and then I'll present the data to the board that makes the decision about alternative programs.
Right. Okay. That's good to know, because I know there's still that stigma that our alternative programs is a disciplinary placement. It's not anymore. It is, an opt-in. It's an alternative way of learning, and I think we still need to continue to get that message across.
But what I do want to share is when I make that recommendation, with the family, I also include the school. Okay. So it's not like we make decisions outside of the home school, so that they are aware and are able to interject when they feel like, a student may do well in alternative programs or may not do well in alternative programs. So we do include them in that decision making.
Well, that's good to know. And then finally, for Ms. Suskin, as when we send out the letters to the state folks, could we also include, and maybe you want to talk to Dr. Navarro to see how best to do it, but the county council members, our judges, and maybe the state's attorney's office, just so they can all be aware of what's out there. And like I said, sometimes it just takes one person to say, I'm giving you an option here and you can take it, or you're going to go a different pathway. So I would just want to make sure that we have that capacity. Okay, I guess I can't really think of anything else. Do you have any other questions? No? I do have one little thing that I just remembered. The number of students that we lose. I know we don't want to focus on that. Do we ask them why they're not coming back? Do we try to find out what their struggle was, and how do we address that in terms of making progress for the future?
We meet, whenever a child leaves the program, we always meet with the family and then have a conversation with the school, and there's a plan for them to transition, if they transition back to their school or they transition to a treatment center. So the students that we currently have that are in treatment, I am in contact with their parents and also with the educational group, and we talk on a regular basis about how they're making progress with their online courses. But students that are not attending, we're still reaching out to them, like that have chronic absenteeism or that go back to their home school. We always have a conversation, like an exit interview, what worked, what didn't work, why don't you want to come back here anymore? And many times the reason that they don't want to come back is because there's such a heightened focus on recovery. And when they're not in recovery, they don't want to have any, they don't want to talk about that at all.
Right.
And it's, it's emotional support, and they don't necessarily want that at the time, but it doesn't mean that they can't come back and access it when they're ready.
Right, which I think is really good, and I appreciate the fact that you let the students know that. The online courses, do you feel like that is at any way a deterrent for kids feeling like they have to do more of it on their own type of thing? Or
Well, most of these students have not been actively engaged in their educational pursuits, and so it's a shift for them because they really have to focus and pay attention, and they create their own learning plans and learning goals. So it is a shift for them, but most of them enjoy it because they can decide, okay, I'm going to work on this day, I'm going to work on during this learning period, so they feel like they have more control over their education than they did previously when someone else gave them a schedule and they work based upon what the teacher says to do. Then you have to, but they really have a lot of self-guided time.
And we also have the teacher support
That's
at
what I
the
was gonna
school
ask
that
you.
they can come in, and so Ms. Barkley has staff that is always on site to support the one, and they probably get a lot more sort of one-on-one intervention for their educational plan because it's co-constructed with the student. But we had a conversation the other day about how we also put a little fire behind, like, make sure that you are moving forward in your, so that there's a nice balance of, yes, being able to work at different times, coming in for support specifically from a content teacher when you get stuck, but also making sure you're on a sequence to move your academics as well.
I appreciate that. That's great.
And if I could just add, we also have tutors who have come in, who are volunteers.
Yeah.
And so we currently have 4 volunteers and are looking to grow that number of volunteers who come in. And they just are there to support the students and have a conversation on recovery, or they all have a background in some kind of academics. So I have a math tutor and I think the English one as well. So we're working on extra ways to support the youth.
That's great. Interages might be a good group to reach out to in terms of tutoring supports. So, just a thought.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you all very much. Thank you so much for coming. Next time, we will be in this publication.
Yes, we will. I just took note of the one that you showed. So, Ms. Wondrowski, I've asked Kevin Lowndes to join me for the next topic, which is an update for the Special Pops Committee on Restraints and Seclusions. I apologize, I'm
Correct.
just pulling up the PowerPoint. She'll have it shortly.
Yeah, I'll take you out. We should go out and- Yeah, well, we'll just be on the-
So, if we could very quickly just do a quick introductions for the team, and then I just wanted to remind you that this was an ask following a couple of conversations that we heard. There was a ask from, I believe, a topic that was brought up around how we were supporting the staff development around physical restraints and seclusions, and I believe actually Ms. Wolf also wanted to know some more details around how that professional development actually takes place, how we look at topics like cultural proficiency as a way that we train and have discussions with our staffs on approaches. And I think Mr. Lowndes also wanted to have the opportunity to share some current updated data on where we are in the district, and of course, get some feedback from you. So with that, I'll turn it to Mr. Lowndes.
Good afternoon. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to come back and talk about physical restraint and seclusion and clarify any questions that anyone might have. And I have with me today Jody Chesman, and Jody Chesman is our trainer extraordinaire, and she trains all our staff on the Crisis Prevention Institute that we contract out, and we use their techniques to make sure that we're training our folks on how to do it with proper techniques. But also with the idea that, the majority of training, and Jody will talk about it, is really on de-escalation skills. Mm-hmm. And what are the things that we should be doing before we go in and do a physical restraint or a seclusion? Because the goal is that a physical restraint and a seclusion is the last option that we have left available for us when a student's really in danger of hurting themselves or hurting other students or other staff members. And I can't say that enough, is that we really want to make sure that people are using all of the strategies that we train them in prior to going in and doing a restraint and a seclusion. Mm-hmm. And so I want to talk a little bit about the overviews. So today we're going to look at restraint and seclusion within Montgomery County. We're going to hear about the training and how it's reported out when schools do a restraint and a seclusion. One of the things that we're proud about is that we do have our schools be very transparent with the parents and with the community, and we do a good job. We've heard from the state doing a good job of being transparent when we're doing a restraint and seclusion. And then you're going to hear about next steps and some things that we put into place to make sure that we're going in the right direction with the number of restraints and seclusions. Because, our goal is to bring down the restraints and seclusions. But, to give a little history, one of the reasons why, we do have restraint and seclusion is that we put in some programs to bring students back from non-public placement. We have almost 600 students currently in non-public placements, and it's not, something, we're always looking at what are ways and what are strategies that we can put out there and use with our staff to bring students back to Montgomery County Public Schools.
We spend a lot of money on.
We do. We spend a lot of money on non-public placement. And so once again, I want to make sure that everyone understands that we do follow the state and the county guidelines on when we can and should be using restraint and seclusion. And once again, that it's a really high threshold that when a student's in danger of really hurting themselves or hurting others, then that's when it can be used. I want to talk a little bit about the definitions, because one of the things we've done the last year is meet with folks that have been concerned about restraint and seclusion and the number of them in Montgomery County Public Schools. And what we often find out is there is a misconception about what it means to be physically restrained or secluded. And I think, one of the things is the definition is the use of physical holding skills without the use of any device or material that restricts the free movement of all or a portion of a student's body. And this also means that, they're not allowed to use the floor. And one of the things that I've heard from community members when we meet on that, Jody and I meet with them, is that there's this perception out there that we're putting students on the floor and using the floor to hold them down. And I just want to make sure that people understand that's not what they're trained in, and that's not what they should be doing. And we're making sure that they understand that within the trainings. Seclusion is the involuntary confinement of students alone in a room or an area from which a student is physically prevented from leaving. Right now, this is only used in our discrete programs, and so you do not find a seclusion room in every one of our schools. And I just want to be clear, because I think the perception out there is that in every one of our schools in Montgomery County, we have these rooms where we're placing students in, and that's not the case. These rooms are only in our programs where we have some students that have a tendency towards some physical violence, and there might need to be a time where a student needs to go into a room and then help themselves de-escalate. And so we're not talking about, we're telling people this is not a strategy that should be used for every student within Montgomery County Public Schools. It's a strategy that should be used with some of our students in these programs. That is part of their program, is that they do have a tendency towards physical violence to themselves or to others.
I just want to also clarify the term violence, physical violence, because as I understand it from what I know of it, it's not just someone who's going to be physically like harmful to other students or even to themselves, but sometimes just completely acting out. Am I wrong? Like just
Totally, you're correct. And it's not that they...
When you say physical violence, I
Right.
guess, you
Right.
immediately jump to, they're going to hurt somebody, and I don't know that I think it's always...
No, I
really about
appreciate
that,
you
but-
saying that. So this is typically a behavior that they can't control.
Right.
And it's part of the disability, and it's really, we have programs in place within those programs, so for example, zones of regulations within our autism program, where we're trying to teach kids how to de-escalate themselves.
Right.
But until they reach a point where they're able to do that, sometimes they'll just, through no fault of their own, just get into a position where they are in danger of hurting themselves or hurting others.
Right.
So I appreciate you, it's not a conscious act of I'm going to hurt somebody and I want to hurt somebody. It's
I
not.
just wanted to-
Well, I have a question about that, and I'm not exactly sure how to phrase the question, so I'm just going to put it in terms of an article I read about Fairfax yesterday. How do you decide that they are physically a danger? How do you decide that? Because it looked as though, that I know that the numbers are not good here, particularly around Black children. So it looks to me as though there is something going on that isn't quite being received at the schools in terms of when the child is physically a threat to themselves or others. I don't know, and I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just trying to understand, because the numbers support that it's Black and brown children that are in seclusion. And so I want to know, are we seeing issues of cultural competency here, or what?
So we also...
I've asked you this question
correct.
before.
And I'll say,
I ask it
we
every
also
time.
are very concerned
I'm sorry.
when you look at the numbers, not only the numbers
right.
of kids being in the seclusion and restrained, but also some numbers of kids participating in some of our programs, and how that's represented. But, I'm going to let Jody to answer how we train on it. But, the thing that people need to understand is that one of the things that, they need to do beforehand is they need to try the de-escalation skills and other strategies prior to going into a restraint and seclusion. That can't be and should not be the first thing. And the other thing is, we have Jody's position. So prior to last year, Jody was part-time trainer and part-time behavior support specialist in our SES-ES program, our program for our students with emotional disabilities. And because what we were seeing was that we needed more than a training. We needed someone that was actually able to train folks and then follow up with school teams and making sure that they go out there to help debrief and make sure that we start monitoring the data and looking at what schools are using the restraints and seclusion at a much higher rate than anyone else, and then going out and following up. And so part of Jody becoming a full-time position is really auditing this. And we're, I'm going to have her talk a little bit about her new role and what it is and how she's working. But part of that is talking about the cultural proficiency and talking about, students and making sure that we understand the students that we're working with before we go into a restraint and seclusion. And I think that, that part was missing. We were training and then and we weren't really following up. In schools, we're sometimes struggling with, after the training, we've all been to trainings where we go back and then can't necessarily remember exactly what the training was about because we don't need it for time later. And so now we have an opportunity to have someone to follow up with the schools. And the other thing is that what we found out this summer and what we continue to find out is we're getting phone calls all the time, and they don't really want the restraint and seclusion. What they want is the strategies on how to de-escalate a situation. And what they understand, and the schools and the principals understand, is they get those strategies at a CPI training. And so they're signing up for the CPI training, but really looking for the de-escalation strategies to use within the schools. And so Jody, one of the great things that she's done this year is that we're putting out trainings just on the de-escalation, with the idea that, if you're not working within a program or with students that really need to be thinking about this restraint and seclusion as part of the strategies being used within that program, then you should really be thinking about taking this training that teaches the de-escalation strategies and how to work with students and really bring down a situation before we ratchet it up. And most of it, Jody and I always talked, is really good parenting skills, and how you talk to a child, how you react to a child when they're acting out, how you don't react to a child when they're acting out. And so, but we don't always remember those easy strategies or good strategies to use, and so that's why I think we're lucky now to have Jody being full-time. One of the things that we also saw with the increased need was an increased ask of summer training. And so Jody did quite a bit of summer training this year, in helping schools and schools teams. And then during the pre-service, she went out and worked with school teams in offering these strategies.
So do those include cultural proficiency and trauma-based training? So that people understand in terms of like what someone might be going through. And
Can I just interrupt before you start, Jody? Yeah. I saw your training. It was excellent.
Yes,
by the way. But what I'm trying to get at is that the numbers are still high for Black and brown children. And so I want to know, are we collecting the data on how many kids are in restraint and seclusion and how many times the same child is in there and who is the referring teacher so that we can identify any issues or problems that need to be addressed with specificity?
And also any that may be not being reported.
So I'm going to let Jody answer the question on and the answer is yes. We are monitoring the data and we are going out to those schools where we see an abnormally large number. The one thing I want to talk about though is before I turn it over to Jody is so we're obligated to make sure that we are providing an opportunity for an educational experience for all students. And so we have some students that the continuous services within Montgomery County is not appropriate for them. And we've looking at a non-public placement, but it's becoming increasingly difficult to find some seats within these non-public placements. But we are still obligated to keep them within our schools until we find a place to put them. And so we had a situation last year, and then we have another situation this year where we have a student who is being restrained at a high rate, but we understand that we don't have the necessary things in place here that a non-public could offer a student, and we're trying to get them into a non-public. But in the meantime, we've provided more help and more supports at the schools to work with those students. But that's why sometimes you'll see an abnormally high number in a school, and it's really important, and Jody does this, is dig into the data to find out the why. Because the why isn't always what it appears on paper. And it's really important that we look at that and look at the individual child and find out why these numbers are high.
But if you're in a program where that might be like a seclusion room might be part of kind of the program, if you will, they don't report every time a student from that program is put into a room.
They do.
Yeah, they do.
They have to. And they should be calling the parents, and they should be letting the parents know. So every time the student is, I don't care what program they're in.
I know that doesn't happen, but
well, they should be, and that's why. So we heard that, and that's why we made Jody full time.
Okay.
Because that's one of the things Jody follows up on. So she's constantly monitoring the numbers, looking at the numbers. And I'm going to let Jody talk about what she does, her job and her training, and then what she's doing now that she's full time.
And I'm going to let her do that. I'm just going to throw out there really quickly, though, for my entire tenure on the board so far, I've been asking the same question. We put so much money into non-public placement. Are there things that we could be like, if we have children who need to go to a school that doesn't have seats, for example, why can't we create our own?
So I will say we're looking at that. We're always looking at that, and I'm going to give an example of a program that doesn't use restraint and seclusion. But so the Magruder program. The Magruder program really came out of looking at why were we taking a lot of students with a certain characteristic and sending them to non-public when we could meet their needs within Montgomery County. And so we created another program within Magruder High School, and what we saw is we have a program that brought back 17 students, and now we're actually up over 50 students within that program. And those are 50 students that we wouldn't have been able to keep within Montgomery County Public Schools. But because we did look at what were the characteristics of a student and so it's really trying to identify, are we sending a large number of students with similar characteristics out to a non-public school for a particular reason? Because some of these, I think people need to understand, are such unique situations with an individual student that it wouldn't be worth it for Montgomery County to try to build a program around that individual student.
Obviously.
And so I just want to let you know that we are constantly looking at bringing students back, and then what kind of resources will we have to put into place to have a program within Montgomery County.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you,
I feel like I had so many things I wanted to address that you were asking. So let's make sure we get to all of that as I go through this. Just a little background about me is I've been an educator in MCPS for my whole career. And for 17 years, I've been, thank you, a behavior support teacher supporting programs for students with emotional disabilities while also coordinating the training for restraint and seclusion. So I've been working on restraint and seclusion for quite some time and kind of seen the progression that we've made as a county in a positive way. I'm a certified instructor with the program that we use, which is the Crisis Prevention Institute, and I'll get into the details about that. I am a member of the MSDE Behavior Steering Committee, and I also was a member of the Restraint and Seclusion Task Force with MSDE, and we were tasked with developing some recommendations for the state Senate and governor regarding the laws with restraint and seclusion. So one of the things that came from that was a change in the requirements for staff who are certified to use the restraint or seclusion intervention. So anybody who's trained to do that must also have a significant amount of additional training. They need to be trained in CPR and first aid. They need to be trained in trauma-informed care, functional behavior assessments and behavior intervention plans, the use of seclusion, exclusion, as well as the adverse effects of restraint and positional asphyxia, in addition to the actual physical training, the CPI, nonviolent crisis intervention training that we do. So we really have increased the requirements for staff to use this level of intervention. The way that we are designed in MCPS is that there is a 5-member crisis team at every school who is certified to use this level of intervention, as well as the staff working in discrete special education programs.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
Jody. Could you tell us who's required to be on that 5-member team, or what
That-
position?
That is usually up to the principal, and what we look at or what we advise them on is looking at staff that's available to respond to crisis. Very often it is administrative staff, sometimes the counselors, sometimes it might be a secretary. Someone who's available, someone who has a healthy mindset in working with kids. We think that philosophical piece is really important. With these new requirements, we're also asking principals to look at, do you have somebody in your building who's already CPR and first aid certified? It would make sense for them to be on the team as they already have a piece of the requirements. So but there are no.
About the new requirements, I didn't go into the new requirements.
I did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So then there's no specific position that's actually required to be on?
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Overall
This was I already knew the answer to
yeah.
that. Thank you.
Yes. So we have been using the CPI, a program through CPI. CPI is the Crisis Prevention Institute. It's a company, and they have a program called Nonviolent Crisis Intervention. And this program is what we've been using since 2011. And as Kevin said earlier, it really focuses on the being proactive and the de-escalation skills. So we came to this program with a need, as the state outlined, we needed a restraint program that met certain requirements. And so that's what brought us to using this program. But the benefits as a system have really been about the de-escalation and the proactive piece. So the program is there's 10 units to the program. And kind of to speak to the value, 10 units of the program, and 8 of them are on de-escalation and processing with students. Only 2 of the units really focus on safety skills and the physical holding skills. With the holding skills, as Kevin said, we don't use any floor holds. The program that we use has been independently evaluated for its safety. So we only have standing and seated interventions. And when we look at all of the holds, they are always keeping the integrity of the diaphragm and the airway. And we train on positional asphyxia and warning signs of distress. And what we see with most of those, it's when that airway or diaphragm is impacted. So the training that we do, it has a number of different components. Some of them are listed on this PowerPoint, but really focusing in on the de-escalation piece. And as Kevin said earlier, a lot of people walk away from the training saying, well, can you come and just do that beginning part for my school? So already this school year, we've trained over 1,000 staff at schools just on the de-escalation piece. And that's, me going out during pre-service week, some of the other trainers working directly with some of the schools they work with. And last year, I trained over 1,600 staff on just the de-escalation piece during staff meetings and working with schools. So
that includes general ed teachers as well.
Yes. So that's what has been the big takeaway is that this stuff is great for everybody. And as I tell people when I train, I use it at home with my children.
Right.
It's really just how to talk in a way that will de-escalate a situation. So the program is, it's broken down into a number of units, and we are really focusing on that de-escalation piece. And, when I do the whole training, the general trainings, I always begin by saying, my goal of the training is to teach you how not to physically restrain someone else's child. Mm-hmm. I think it's so important that if we can continue learning, teaching, and practicing those de-escalation skills, it will help us on the back end in terms of reducing the need for physical intervention. So as Kevin said, we are offering the training without physical interventions open to the county for schools to send staff as needed. Mm-hmm. We also, starting in the spring of last year and continuing into this year, I've been doing a training of trainers for staff development teachers. Okay. So to really looking to build capacity at the school level. Mm-hmm. So having staff development teachers come, they'll do online learning modules through the Crisis Prevention Institute, and then they spend a half a day with me learning how to teach the staff about some of these skills, and not just how to teach it, but then how to reinforce it and how to go back and how to have conversations about some of the skills that maybe teachers are forgetting or not using all the time. So we're doing that, and then we're also, next week, I am doing a training for our Learning and Achievement Specialists, both in OSSI and the Department of Special Education, to again, build their capacity so that not only can they work with the teachers, but they can maybe support if a staff development teacher is doing a training for a host school, it would be an additional person to support them in implementing that training.
Is there at any point a requirement for people to take this training? So, for example, you hear about a school that has a student that teachers are having difficulty with, and there's questions about their placement and all that kind of stuff. Do we say to those teachers who might be in a position where they have to interact with that child, we are sending you are getting the training because we need you to better understand how to work together with this student?
So that's something that we're seeing as a requirement with my monitoring. Mm-hmm. So for schools that, kind of going back to your question, when we're seeing high numbers or constant interventions used for certain students. One of the things that I'm going to be doing this year, now that we have this position, is it allows me to go back into schools, meet with leadership teams to talk about, okay, here's your data, this is what we're seeing. What are going to be our action plans to reduce these numbers? And some of it might be saying, let's have these 3 people who are constantly involved come to this training. Or let's have these 3 people meet with me, and I'm going to do some reinforcement of skills if they had already been to the training. So we are looking at it that way. I'm hoping with the training of staff development teachers and learning and achievement specialists that they're going to be able to go in and do some of that similar kind of coaching when they're seeing behaviors that are less intense.
I just hope that we keep it in the forefront of their mind, because I'm not even sure how many teachers are completely aware that that's out there if it's something that they want to participate in. So, yeah.
Question, up there where you have the concepts included, I don't specifically see cultural competency. So are you relying on the sort of general cultural competency training that all teachers get, or is it specific to this module also?
There is not a component on culture that is clearly cultural competency. It is interwoven into a few of the concepts, such as the verbal and nonverbal communication. We address it in that section. We also address it in some of our key concepts, one being the precipitating factors, which is a discussion we have about things people bring with them to situations.
Yeah, I was just getting ready to ask you about
the
inherent biases. So I'm just trying to figure out where you're providing this level of communication to them, because we're still seeing a number of Black and brown children who are being subject to seclusion and restraint. So I'm trying to figure out, do they need more training in this area and more support?
Go ahead. So I've had recent conversations with Troy Body about the need to put some more explicit talk or training about cultural competency within this training. And so Troy is going to meet with Jody to hear and see what she does already, and then provide input on things that he thinks that's missing, so that we could beef this up in a way that it addresses, and not only addresses, but supports what he's already training in. Because one thing we don't want to do is say something counter to what Troy is training within the cultural competency. So we all want to make sure we're in line together and we're saying the same messages. And so I talked to Troy about that, and then he needs to see what was already being said, and then we need to make sure that we're all in alignment.
So the team that's selected from the school, whoever it is, do they train together? Did I miss that?
No, I didn't say that.
Okay.
They can. What we find impacting, if they go to the training in the summer, very often I have teams come together. But during the school year, it can be too impactful for a school to send 5 people at the same time. So they might send 2 people on one day, 3 people on another day, and maybe not all together. Because we don't want it to...
Do you think it would be advantageous for this type of training to be in the summer then, so they could train as a team?
We do offer it over the summer.
But you can't require it over that summer, is that what you're saying?
Correct, correct. So we have found that the need is so high that we do offer it year-round.
Okay.
And it is currently grant funded, so we're able to provide substitutes for staff when they're out of the classroom attending the training.
But I think your point, Ms. Wolf, is a good one as we take away some ideas on how to beef this and make it connected, is this question of if a team is coming, and of course, a team of 5 coming from a certain size school is going to feel much more impactful if everybody leaves at once. But I think a takeaway here and a suggestion here is that if the team is trained separately, that there is an opportunity for the team to come together with the principal and have sort of a what did you hear, what did you learn, sort of standardizing around these pieces. And that could also be woven into some of Troy's interjection of the work around what are the follow-ups of people's reflections on that work, tied to the work that they're talking about in the space of how they're seeing the work of cultural proficiency and tackling implicit biases in their own buildings. And I think that's a good suggestion, to just do some follow-ups that tie teams together to understand how they approach this work.
I also think it just needs to be specific to the training. I mean, that anybody looking at what's involved in it ought to know that implicit bias training is a part of this. And I have attended your training, and I know that it's there, but I think it needs to be specific. I don't know what Troy has in mind for it, but I think between the three of you, or however many are on the team thinking about it, that you need to actually have it so that anybody looking will know that's an expectation. Because when I don't see it on the slide, I don't necessarily think it's a real expectation.
Right, exactly. It should be very specific.
And what we have on the slide is what is reflected directly out of their program. So we can add to it, but this is what they have as their canned program
I understand
that we are contracting with them for.
But you understand my position.
Yes,
that
absolutely.
If I don't see it up there and I can't go back and pull up the slide from training, it doesn't resonate the same way with me.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
One of the things that, as we're moving forward and looking at things that we can be doing differently, is the monitoring piece. And so as we are looking at numbers, and I think this is part of the reason this position came about, was to be able to go back into schools. I was at 2 different schools last week where we were talking about, kind of, as you were saying, following up on training they've had, clarifying things, practicing, and then talking about specific students in specific situations. So it's allowing me to go into schools and do that. And as we're looking at data and starting to look at the numbers, we're going to be doing that more and more, and meeting with leadership teams, talking about the data that they're seeing, and then getting into some of those root causes, and then how are we addressing those root causes.
So how often are you reporting out the data? Is this once a year, twice a year, once a month? How often are you collecting data?
With each school.
The data is collected all the time. It's through an online system. I'm reviewing it every couple weeks. Lately, I've been reviewing it every week, just because it's the beginning of the school year, so I'm trying to get a hold of how quickly things are happening. We report to the state once a year.
I would like to get some regular information on seclusions and restraints, maybe a monthly broken down. I know you can't identify the child, but what I want to actually be able to tell is whether or not X child has been restrained 10 times. And at what school? No, I don't need to know the teacher or whatever, just what, so that I can sort of track it myself. And I know that you're collecting this kind of information to take a look at it, but I need to see that for myself, because I'm not convinced that the cultural competency training we're doing is actually benefiting this situation. And I've heard from several of the teachers that deal with special education issues that they think it needs to be beefed up as a separate module specific to people who are actually dealing with this constantly.
And that's something I think that we can talk about in terms of, we do have module training that is a requirement, so we can see what Troy has and see if we can kind of.
Well, what I'm thinking is that module training, if it's online, this is, again, I will say, I think it needs to be live training, and it needs to be a requirement. That's my take on it. I'm certainly willing to hear what Troy thinks about it, but I think this module stuff, I mean, to be honest, you can sit there and click the buttons and stuff. I think if you come and see it and are actually forced to think about it and talk about it, it goes further.
So what I have found with one of the versions of our CPI training is not just a module training, but they do that piece first, and then it gives everybody a common base of understanding to then dig deeper and have real conversations about.
And that's why I think the team needs to be trained together. Right there, just what you said. Thank you.
One of the other things I just wanted to add to this is, so the request for the regular reports is also, so there's a component of this work that is the awareness, the training, and the emphasis on de-escalation, but also an acute training and rethinking of the training component as it becomes, as we talk about restraints and seclusions. The other piece is also making schools very aware and having those conversations about what's happening, so that there's a reflectionary piece, and then the schools taking the next step of sort of saying, what kind of culture do we have in our schools, or what's happening based on the data. So I think that the piece around the data and looking at the number of restraints in a school, the number of students being restrained multiple times, how often, does elevate for the schools a urgency to take a look at that. And also in comparison to schools that have, the similar demographics in terms of program sizes and so forth. And I think that that's the point that is also important. It's that monitoring and following up with the information to the schools, and the conversation and working together around what does this data tell us about how we as adults are approaching this, how do we have to support students. That is going to be sort of the important piece. So I think the training obviously we need to constantly be looking at that. It's what we do with the data that we are collecting. That's the impactful piece that you bring up, Ms. Wolf.
And I think you're absolutely right. And not to get ahead of Jody, I noticed that she has on here debriefing. And it was one of the components of the training that I sat through with her. And I think that is great. I'll let you talk about it, and then I'll tell you what I have to say about it.
Let me just add one other thing, though, that Jody's not the only one that's debriefing these restraints and seclusions when they see a high number. So what you'll see is that, so if it's within one of our autism programs where they're having a difficult case, Chris Seekan and her crew, her instructional specialists, are out working with that school to help get things in a good place. And so I don't want you to think that Jody's the only one, that we have other people that are in charge of these programs that are also looking at the restraints and seclusions, and also looking at some really difficult situations that are taking place, and helping get things into an area where everyone feels good about what's going on.
So I have a question, though, in terms of outside of one of our specialized program, for example, how do we work with staff and everything to make sure that there's a full understanding of a student's IEP or 504 plan, and that some of whatever is incorporated in that may have something to do with the behaviors that they're seeing in the classroom, and how that they can work with that without forgetting that there might be special considerations.
So we have our supervisors. So if the student's not in a discrete program, but it's a student that's exhibiting these behaviors, then our supervisors, special education supervisors that are working with the 3 areas, are actually going out and providing supports to the schools on this. And we also have behavior folks within Phil's K-12, and then also Amy's got folks within her pre-K program that are designated to go out and provide supports to the schools. Because, if it's a one-time thing, it's one thing, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean anything other than maybe someone's had a really bad day, and we need to understand why that student's had a bad day. But if it's something that happens on a consistent basis, then special education needs to be in there and working with the school and making sure that we're providing the right types of resources that school needs and that student needs in order to be successful. So all of these numbers, I think, trigger something, and depending on where the student is within the continuum of services, then they get a different type of reaction. And so if a student's in a discrete program already, then we have behavior and support teachers within those discrete programs that are working with the schools and providing supports to the schools. If the student has not yet been identified for special education services and displaying some of this behavior, then we have our folks out working with our K-12 programs, working with the schools to, first of all, put structures in place and strategies in place to see whether it is, something they can get under control with just some behavior management strategies within the school, within the general population, which will allow the student to remain in the general population. But then if it becomes something that needs some more intensive support, then they should be helping guide them through the continuum of services.
So before I move on to the documentation, I want to jump back because, Ms. Wolf, you asked a question at the beginning of our presentation about how do they know when it's appropriate to use a physical restraint or seclusion. So one of the components of the program I just want to point out is the decision-making matrix. And this is actually a tool that we train staff on. I was just at a school the other day reviewing it with them because they had some questions of, well, what happens if he does this? And should we do it if he does this? And so we went back to the decision-making matrix, which is a tool to make that decision more objectively rather than subjectively. And so it gives them really a matrix that they're looking at to assess the behavior. And what we're really weighing is the risk of the behavior greater than the risk of the restraint? There's always risk involved. So it's trying to weigh those two things. And so I wanted to address your question so that we know that it's just not willy-nilly, how am I feeling today? Should we use this intervention? There are tools that staff are given to help make those decisions. So I wanted.
Of a tool.
That was the decision-making
Yeah.
matrix.
Want to give
So-
an example of kind of with the matrix.
Okay, so with the matrix.
Because I was going to offer an example.
Okay.
Question, but, yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was so Jill. Let's just say, and this goes back to about the being violent to oneself or others. So you have a kid who just plops themselves down on the ground of the classroom and is, kicking their feet and whatever, not hitting anybody. How would you address that behavior?
Great example. So what we're looking at is what's the likelihood of injury, and if there is, how bad is it going to be? And then once staff have an understanding of that, we ask them to look at the tool to help you decide how can you reduce the risk. So if I have a student who's on the floor kicking furniture, maybe not people,
Right.
it could be a little bit risky, but I think that behavior might be less risky than us restraining the student. Then I say, what could we do to reduce the risk even more? Well, could I start moving the table? First, can I move the other students out of the room? Can I move the tables and chairs out of the way? Would that reduce the risk to the student? And then would they be on the floor, maybe just kicking kind of what we see as like a tantrum, maybe? Right. And would that be a safer option? So we're trying to have them think about assessing it in and of itself, and then what can we do to reduce that, to even further reduce the need for physical intervention.
But if assuming that it's determined that that student needs seclusion, for example, to de-escalate, how do you get them there?
So we do train staff on how to move the student from one location to another. That's part. So we have holds that are sedentary.
I did the training with the holds,
right, where we're just either sitting or standing, but then we also, in our standing hold, can walk and move them to that location.
Is there a difference in the way elementary school teachers might look at this versus middle school versus high school? Does the training distinguish?
The training is universal. The program that we use is kind of pre-K through elder care. They, work in hospitals and things like that. So it is a universal training. However, we break it down for staff. We talk about, like, if I have a first grader who's punching me, that may be very different. The risk of that may be very different than if I have an 11th grader punching me. So we talk about that. That's a piece when we're evaluating the risk and we're trying to make that decision. The age comes into play, the cognitive ability comes into play. There's always questions about kids who elope or who leave. Is that risk behavior? And we highlight for the staff in the trainings all of the factors that come into that decision. That it's not just based on how I'm feeling, or that it's the environment, it's the student, it's their individual needs. So
I was just wondering because, elementary school children have tantrums and they might hit. So I was wondering if this is something that would impact their record and follow them, and it just may be that they're elementary school kids having tantrums.
And part of the first unit with the physicals, before we even teach the physical interventions, are ways to keep yourself safe. So a couple years ago was in an elementary school working with a student who was having a really rough day, and part of what we teach is how to block and keep myself safe if a student's hitting me, or if they grab me or pull my hair, how I can get out of that without having to restrain the student. So, with that situation, I was able to block, and, it was a little guy, and he had enough, and he got tired, and then he was done. And so we didn't need to engage in anything else. And so those skills were enough to keep everybody safe. So, all right, jumping back to where we were. So in terms of the documentation.
Oh, one question.
Yeah, sure.
Is there any advantage? Okay, you trained 1,000 people so far, you said, this year, I believe.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there isn't some advantage to making sure that all new teachers who've never taught anywhere before are trained in this, so that the tantrum an elementary school kid is having is just that, a tantrum, versus an 11th grader. I mean, I don't know what the standard is for teaching or how we're providing this, but I'm wondering if all new teachers, new to teaching, should be provided this.
So, and it is a pretty long training that we offer. So we are teaching staff development teachers so that they can either pull that cohort of new teachers at their school building and do, here's a basic how we're interacting with kids, how to manage your classroom, kind of a 101, and use some of those skills that they're learning in that training of trainer model that I'm doing. So in terms of the documentation, and this is what kind of leads to our data, is that staff are all trained to document every incident of restraint and seclusion. And they communicate with parents. We follow the state regulation. There needs to be an IEP meeting after the use of restraint or seclusion.
Every time?
Unless it is part of the student's IEP and behavior intervention plan.
So if the student is not already special ed, you're going to convene an IEP team?
You're going to convene an EMT meeting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So the parent is notified every time this is used, unless it's part of their...
They're notifying every time it's used, period.
Okay, that's new.
That is how they've been trained for quite some time. And that is the expectation. And when there's been an intervention, parents need to be notified. We ask staff to contact the parent verbally, and there is a letter that goes home to parents. The letter might be relatively new. I don't know what your framework is for new, but there is a letter.
Within 4 years. 4 or 5
So, yeah, so those are both those are requirements.
Okay.
And there is the IEP meeting, and then we do require that staff debrief as well. Our discrete special education programs are all committed to using a formal debriefing form where they're gonna, I believe very strongly that that's where the learning happens, when they're reflecting on the situations and looking at what did we do well, what do we need to do better, where do we need to practice, to work on our skills. So there is the formal debriefing that is done in specific programs. But then a lot of schools are wanting that guidance for that debriefing meeting. I was at a school last week, and they asked me to send them the form so they can start to use that as well, even though they don't have one of our discrete programs.
So when do they have time to do that?
That's difficult. That's the challenge. And we talked about the debriefing doesn't need to be another hour-long meeting.
Right.
It might be that we meet for 5-10 minutes at the end of the day and just talk about how it went. Do we have any questions? Are we all on the same page? What could we do tomorrow so we don't have that, so things don't escalate to that same place? Is there something we could do differently?
So for the formal form, is that electronic?
So this is something new we're kind of piloting this year and seeing if we see if we're hoping we're going to see a decrease in the number of incidents when we're looking at that. And it is, to answer your question, it is electronic. Different programs are using it differently. Some are printing it and handwriting it. Some are using it as a Google form.
So are they sitting together when they fill it out?
Yes.
So then there's no opportunity if I really feel differently. I think we've discussed this before. And I'm not willing to say that in front of the team. There's no opportunity to provide information in any other format to you.
So that was something after we had previously talked about that we've been talking about how do we want to do that? Do we want to have everybody do their own Google form and then share that when they come together? So that's something we're looking into how can we get that to all the schools that are piloting.
Well, the Google form won't work because you're going to print it out or have everybody look at the file. I'm talking about the situation where I had concerns, and I think you should know my concerns, but the Google form will allow the team to know that I didn't really agree with whatever. That are you thinking about building something into your system that provides for that kind of?
So each person
and it's not a got you. It's just that I think if you're going to get information, you ought to get truly what people are thinking. And they may not be so willing to tell you that if they know that everybody's going to be sharing in what they said.
Absolutely. Well, that's absolutely something we can look into, how we can make that doable for schools. I think we're also really wanting this to be a useful tool. We don't want it to be burdensome for anybody, but I want everybody to have a venue to be able to share if they don't agree with the team.
So one of the things that we struggle with that also is, so the point of the debrief is to get everyone on the same page. And really to get everyone on the same page, people have to be willing to voice how they think it went and whether they feel like it was needed or not at that time. And so we've discussed, so if that form and everyone fills it out differently and it comes up to, say, Jody, and Jody's the only one that knows that someone didn't believe in it, then how do we get back, or how do we work with the team to get them to understand there was a different viewpoint as to what kind of action we should have taken as a team? And that's kind of where we're struggling with that. I mean, we're going back and forth, and we understand, the value of it, but the real value of the debrief is to get everyone to be able to voice what they feel, how everything went, and whether they should have done it in the first place together as a team to get better and to understand what to do the next time. And so, we're struggling with that piece of.
Well, I will be honest with you, Kevin, that that diversity in our schools among staff is limited.
Yeah.
And if the team, to be honest, if I'm on a team and the other 4 people are of a different race or ethnicity, I may not be willing to say what I feel because I still have to continue to work with them. It's no different from these conversations on race that people are having. So that's what I'm trying to figure out. How do I share that kind of information? Because I'm not sharing it as a got you. I may think you really need to think about this when you talk to the team, but I don't want to be the one to let them.
And I agree with that. We're just trying to figure out then what's the then what after that. So that the information's collected, the only one who then knows that someone didn't agree would be Jody, who's looking at the forms, and then what is she going to do? So it's easy to do something when there's, a time or an opportunity, or Jody sees the need to go out and debrief with a school, but say this is a school's only incident that happened all year.
Well, that's a little different.
And so I guess that's, we're still working on it and trying to figure out how to make that happen and make it useful for the team. That because it's really the then what that's important as to then how are we going to address that issue with someone not feeling like it shouldn't have been done at that time, and then how do we have a discussion there that's brought up in front of the team so then everyone can discuss it and then we can learn from it.
Frankly, I think that's an issue in schools. Period, across.
But I'm not suggesting that it's not something that she shouldn't bring up. I'm just saying there's a way to then channel the discussion that might make people think about what they did differently. But I may not be willing to say that to the team, like, oh, I don't think I wouldn't have interacted with a child like that because maybe it wasn't threatening to me.
Right.
And I don't know, these are conversations that I don't know how you have, but I think we have to have them if we're going to reduce the number of restraints and seclusions of Black and brown children.
Well, we frankly have, we frankly need to have those conversations when we look at a couple of components in the everyday schooling of students. And I think that is part of the, what's the balance? And I think it's a very legitimate question. What's the balance at which, power dynamics, race dynamics, cultural dynamics, differences. And this is something that comes up often. I mean, I think there's, this question of how do we know, and then what do we do within a period of time to think through on how to act. I'll tell you that I think we need to digest this and think about it in a couple of different ways. I don't think we should think about it by ourselves. I mean, I think we should bring in,
OSSI for sure.
OSSI sitting at the table. I'm thinking about the Troy coming in and helping us think through, because in other areas, when we've had other incidents where the staff really has to challenge and think about their conscious or unconscious biases coming out in a certain situation, we've had to think about that. We've had to think about it, frankly, with power dynamics. Some teachers, if you're the principal and the rest of the team is a teacher group, you may feel some power dynamics around it. So it's a good push for us to think and digest through, systems and processes, and then how do we, the good thing about having Jody is that we can gather some data and then do deeper dives. We don't have to figure it out in one set of one process. We can do deeper dives and unpack a team and check a couple of schools where we can do sort of deeper follow-ups with the team over time, individual one-on-one conversations and so forth, and follow the dynamics of a team, because I think a closer study of the dynamics of the team are very, very important. We're talking about this particular topic, but I am thinking in my head of so many other topics where we have to really study the dynamics of a team to understand where, if they are truly all aligned, and what drives their decision-making processes.
Exactly. That's what I'm getting at.
Right.
It's not meant to be a gotcha. It's what did they base that decision on? Yeah. Thank you.
So I do let teams know that I'm always available to come out and facilitate some of those discussions. I have had, when we're training, all of the trainers try to empower, like, if you are going to be on this team, this is about the safety of kids. Right. And if it's about the safety of kids, we need to find our voice. And so we do have those conversations with our classes as we go through this training, because this is a very serious skill that we really can't sit quietly by.
Okay, and this is going to be my final say on this. You said this team could include anybody. It might include the secretary at the school. I might be an ethnic secretary, Hispanic, Black, whatever. I'm not going to feel that I have the same power on this team as the teachers, the experts, the principals, or whatever. But I may have feelings around what happened to that child who might be of the same ethnicity as me, because I would not have reacted that way. And I know that's a difficult conversation to have, but I think it's one that you have to start thinking about.
And Ms. Wolf, I think one of the important things, and I'm glad that you're raising it explicitly the way you are. Part of the reason 2 years ago we decided to do a professional learning for school teams when they came back together, and we waited, frankly, for SEIU to come back to work, is we didn't want a conversation to only happen with our administrators and our teachers around race, biases, cultural proficiency as they think about it, is we wanted them to have it with their entire staff. And I think that is a very important point about who is part of your team. It could be a security team lead, it could be a coach, it could be a whole bunch of different people who are part of it. But that's the work, unpacking about how I feel in a team setting around this table, how we all look at a situation, and what do we walk in for, because the children could look very much like our own children. And we come in with our thinking about it, and we cannot dismiss that there's power dynamics, and not addressing those is not understanding that they influence the team and the team decisions and who gets to say ultimately what happens. So I just think that's a very good push, and it's a push, frankly, of our work around how we approach cultural proficiency in this district on a multitude of areas. We're talking about this one specifically, but I think it's very, very loud and clear on how we think about this from the perspective. And the dynamics of the team, to your point, is what we need to unpack in this situation.
because it's unfortunate that right now it feels a lot like the school climate surveys is the only way to put a voice out there without worrying about, and anyways, so, yep.
So the last piece we just wanted to highlight was how we're addressing disproportionality. And I do think we've addressed a number of things already. But it's the debriefing, looking at my role in terms of being able to get out and meeting with school teams, reviewing that data, being able to do some more root cause analysis, debriefing with specific teams when we're seeing patterns. Also meeting with them to practice, to see how they're currently functioning, and talking out situations with them. So that's what we're moving to doing this year, is really being able to get in and meet with teams and work with them when we're seeing those patterns of decisions and those patterns in their data.
I'm just going to throw out there, I'm sure that, but I'm very happy to see this portion of the slide. I really hope that we're making sure that our schools are doing it, because a lot of times we have very good intentions, but if it's not happening, if the parents aren't being notified, if the data is not being reviewed monthly, if the debriefing gets said we'll do it tomorrow because there's not enough time today, all of these things are great in theory, but if they're not in practice, then it's, not for nothing.
Absolutely.
So I agree, and I've heard.
You've heard this from me many times.
Right. And so as a result of that, we have a position in place who will follow up and make sure these things are happening. Because it's like you said, it's one thing to train, but it's then another thing to follow up to see whether the training and everything is being put into place. Yeah. And so in the past, we've done the training, and now we're doing the second part. Where we're also
sometimes it might be as easy even as checking in with the parent to say, how do you feel like this went? See if they know about it, or if they found out because their kid came home and told them, or if,
the school told them.
Right. So. Okay, unless anybody has anything else that they would like to add.
No, Ms. Wondrowski, I just want to make sure we go through our follow-ups. There was a request from Ms. Wolf, I think it's going to come up as a follow-up, that we put together, and we may seek some additional clarification as we put together what a regular report would look like coming back to the members of the Special POPs Committee regarding the number of restraints and then the multiple restraints for student. And so we will provide that data following. It might be confidential data.
It might be broken down by demographics and all that.
And we'll break it down by demographics, and then some of that information may be confidential in terms of the number of students, so that we keep the information trusted. And then we'll come up and we'll take away some of the discussions that we had today about just making sure we follow up with the processes we've instituted. And Jody, thank you so much. I know she's been amazing, and we should have had her full time a long time ago. So we're mobilizing across the district. The number of people that have now had a level of training around de-escalation is so much greater, and the need is always there. To your point, we're looking at how we support this. Is every year we hire about 1,000 teachers. So every year this work just sort of continues, just to keep up with new staff alone. So we appreciate that, and we appreciate the feedback around bringing other departments to help us think through these components as well.
I think.
And so I know you're doing a train the trainer for new staff, but can we get a report that shows that they actually did go back and train their new staff in the schools?
That's a very good idea.
Thank you.
It's funny you say that. Jody and I just had a conversation last week about that. How's Jody gonna follow up and making sure? And so one of the things she's gonna do too is bring them back in November or December with the staff development teachers and give a refresher, but also hear how the training went back in their schools.
Maybe they could keep track of who they're training.
The tracking of it, the date they did it, and how many people attended or whatever.
Right.
Thank you.
The trainers that you train.
Yes. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you.
That'd be good.
Thank you very much. Ms. Wondrowski, we wanted to come back to you with some updates on a couple of follow-ups. One of them was a request to come up with an update on the Mental Health Week. We were going to provide you a verbal update, but Ms. Rubens is going to join me. She has a couple of slides she wanted to provide as an update, so I'm going to ask Ms. Rubens to come down and provide an update and also answer any questions from the committee.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I also wanted to mention that Dr. Christina Conley, who's been doing a great deal of work along with Dr. Elizabeth Rathbone on the mental health fair that's upcoming, is also in the audience. So just to provide you a little update, will you be clicking?
No, that's the clicker.
Oh, is that the clicker? Thank you. So just to remind everyone about the 6 essentials of Be Well 365. And so for each of our essentials, and they pertain to all schools, all staff, all students, for each of our essentials for each month, we are highlighting a theme around each of the essentials. And so this calendar is also available on our Be Well 365 website, which we continue to improve and update throughout the year. So we're actually, September, October is culturally responsive relationship building. Last week, we kicked off with an email to our principals at all 3 levels, where we provided them with some resources around how they can engage in this, and then specific resources for administrators, things that they can do.
What does that mean exactly? Culturally responsive
Relationship building. So culturally responsive relationship building means that we're taking into account, so it's the opposite of saying, well, I don't see color when I see people, I just see people. What we're saying is that, you know, different people, ethnicities are presenting themselves in our schools, and how can we and that's a great example.
2-minute dance it out.
So that's a great example of, you know, that's some music that I actually listen to. So
Me too.
Right.
Dance it out. Dance it
So,
out.
I wondered if that culturally responsive relationship building, you know how it was National Hispanic Month, you know,
Heritage Month.
I noticed that some of our schools did something.
Right.
Some of our schools
didn't.
didn't. I don't know. I don't know whether you should have them acknowledge it at all schools, but shouldn't we have some sort of consistency around at least
Yes, we should.
discussing it, because a number of them didn't do anything.
So we have set out through the expectation, Dr. Statham and I have set out the expectation of making sure that we celebrate all of the heritage months. And we put out some information. We also, through OSIP, the curriculum office has put out resources. And we are continuously following up with any school where there was not an acknowledgement of a Heritage Celebration Month. So if that didn't happen, we and myself and OSSI would like to hear about it. So we can just follow up if we have, perhaps we've had new administrators or changes, but we have have asked, and we follow the resolutions from the board around celebrating all of the heritage months, and those are generated through my office and Dr. Statham's office and goes out to schools. So
Do they make it easy for them? Like, do they give them suggestions? Of
yes,
things?
so we have curricular suggestions that get put out there from a historical, members of the community, activities that can be done through the arts. The other piece is that there is a way in which we've brought in different cultural experiences that schools, especially elementary schools this year, we focused a lot. Dr. Rumpf brought in different cultural experiences that elementary schools can also do. And then we communicate closely with PTAs because they tend to do some celebrations and for us to tag into it. But we are appreciative every time we can know and help a school that maybe has not acknowledged and celebrated it in different ways, whether it's in the classrooms, whether it's a whole school. We don't tell schools to do a whole school event, but we have been very clear that we want all the Heritage Months celebrated that we bring forward to the board.
So how do you know that this is occurring or not occurring? I know you were saying that, but I didn't quite get it.
Well, so I think part of it is the discussions that happen primarily with OSSI around activities. Our folks in curriculum and instruction know that it is taking place because we get questions around, do you have new materials on this? And so every single year we are not checking off every single school. Perhaps that is a suggestion for us to make sure that at certain Heritage Months, we're checking off that every single school has evidence that it has happened. And just hearing your concerns about whether or not people across all of our schools are actually doing it raises for me the need to maybe actually do more strict sort of
I would just
evidence
random
on it.
sample. I don't think you can look at every
Yeah.
school every time
Just
there's
ask
a
them to
heritage.
report what they're
we
doing.
may be,
But just
yeah.
random
and-
sample.
Yep, it's a good suggestion.
As far as the consistency aspect goes, that's actually why I was pushing so hard for the mental health day, which is now the mental health week and everything, is because some schools do stuff and some schools don't, and just trying to ensure that there's at least one period of time where everybody is recognizing the same issues, so.
Right, and to that end, in that email that we recently sent, we did ask the schools to send us what they're doing. And then we also provided them with examples for, like, Rockville, for example, has Rock Village, what they're doing around Be Well 365, which I think is really amazing and awesome. So we're putting it out as good news for the schools. So another way to encourage our schools to participate is for them to see what their counterparts are doing. It really gets them ramped up. And since that email, I'm happy to say I've received quite a few submissions from schools, and we'll be going out to Wooten, for example, next week to see what they're doing. So that's one way we're looking to it. And also, I just wanted to mention, for the culturally responsive, we're looking at all different types of cultures, and we gave them examples of certain neighborhoods where our schools are located, the rich history there. You might want to go for a walk with the students or some staff members and do some things around that. November is Mental Health and Emotional Awareness Month. And of course, we have the huge fair plan, which we're greatly looking forward to. I think the team is doing a fantastic job. January, Character Education and Empathy. February, Trauma-Informed Practices. March, Restorative Justice and Restorative Practices. And then April and May, Physical Health and Wellness. And for each of these, we plan to continue providing our schools with various resources, things that they can use, highlighting what they're doing as we continue to make the Be Well and mental health work more robust in OFC. And then just a little bit more, we are looking for all of our schools to participate during Mental Health Awareness Week. We are providing them with a template that we're asking them to, very short, nothing intricate, that they can fill out that just tells us what it is that they're doing and how they're engaging. We're also working with and Christina probably can chime in, but we're working with MCPS-TV to go out and sort of chronicle what's happening at different schools, and making sure that we're getting that information. So just part of some of the great things we have planned.
I know that there are some groups out there that have offered, and I know, like, we talked about one of them, something Mind.
Every Mind.
Every Mind, yes. Groups like that, that we're working with and collaborating with. Is there a list put together for our schools to be able to say, the Family Justice Center is offered to come in and speak, these, Every Mind is offered to come in and do a workshop, or whatever the different scenarios are? Is there a list of things that schools can easily grab to make this a successful week?
Sure. That's such a timely question because we just started working on that. We're getting so many submissions. We have so many partners now. So we're just putting that together. But we're also giving out resources. So Family Justice Center sent us these great cards not too long ago. And so we distributed those to all of our staff members. So as they're going out for school visits, they're actually taking and handing those cards out. And we hope to have the list out by the end of October so schools can see the various agencies that they can partner with.
So if it comes at the end of October, one of the concerns that we heard very, very extensively last year was that schools were given basically, some PPWs and stuff said they really kind of found out about it like in that week. Others said that, they had a week or whatever, but just, is that enough time to plan anything?
That's particular to that list. Prior to that, we're sending emails, we're tweeting, we're putting things out on the website. That list we just want to vet with legal because we want to make sure that any agencies that we say to the schools, this is a great agency to partner with, is actually a great agency to partner with. So that's what's taking a little bit of time. But in the interim, we're still sending out materials. We've been sending out materials from September, the memorandums that have gone out, the emails that are going out, the tweet. We're trying to use different mediums to make sure that more people see all of the information. So they're still getting lots of information. And I think as far as being ready and prepared for the fair, we started much earlier this year. I think folks are aware of it. They know about it. We're planning some great fun things, music-wise, etc. So I think I think the promotion and the information is out there. I was just being specific as to the list of agencies.
Yes, and I appreciate that. I'm trying to be specific about the list of agencies as well. I'm trying, I guess what I'm suggesting is it might take time for some of our schools to schedule people to come in and speak to the students or to put together an assembly or to organize a peer-to-peer forum type of thing, or I'm very hopeful that all of our schools, as we've discussed in the past, are planning some way of introducing their staff members to their students, whether it be, like I said, at an assembly or something. I mean, this is something we've been talking about for a while now, a couple of years, but in terms of making sure, because a lot of kids expressed in our student forum that they don't know who to go to necessarily, and they don't know what the difference is between a school psychologist, a social worker, and their school counselor. And a lot of students don't want to go to the counselors because they're afraid that these are the people who are writing their college recommendations, and they don't want to put out there that they've got mental health concerns or emotional distress stuff because they feel that might impact what somebody would write about them, these type of things.
So I think that's why we did the bookmarks. Those are completed and...
Oh, okay, I see.
Yeah, so Christina has it there. Those are completed and all set to go. So that, we have a lot of materials and that the schools have access to prior to sending out any one particular piece of item. But yeah, I thought the bookmarks were a great idea and a great way of differentiating. And
I haven't seen them, so.
Oh, really?
I mean, yeah,
We
but
have
I
them
see
for
it
you
over there,
today.
but I haven't seen it, so looking forward to that.
I don't know what your communication plan is for the mental health fair, but I want to encourage you to consider using the regional service centers, the county's regional service centers. They send out a letter every Thursday or Friday, and also the library system.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Ms. Mondrowski, one of the other things that Ms. Rubens is actually following up on is a conversation she actually just recently had with Dr. Smith about putting together students and counselors. To your point, you triggered for me this piece around thinking about this not just from how do students know who their counselors is, but also bringing counselors and students together and maybe other folks together to talk about this question of engagement, perceptions, who do I know, how do I contact, from a listening session And I think that is a great way to engage students in that process, because I think part of this is the student, when we bring student leaders and to talk to the board, I think those have, in those sessions, those issues have risen. And so one of the things we want to probably be is more strategic of bringing the student voice as we tackle some of those issues of knowing who do I go to, what's the easiest way for asking and requesting help. And then the other thing is, and I hope that you see this as you go out more to schools and talk to staff, is that we've been trying to be much more using the hotline and having the image of the hotline, and when you call, in a whole bunch of different situations, opportunities, places, locations in schools, through different venues, so that we get them out more. And I think it was Ms. Wolf that brought up last spring, how do we socialize this in a way that kids who need help and support are able to see the logo, understand the logo, knows what it means, and see it in multiple places to be able to access or request supports. And then one other thing I wanted to note is our partnership with the Department of Health and Human Services. This year, we are working on an implementation grant for mental health, sort of what we call Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports, specifically tied to schools that don't have a wellness center or a school-based health center and don't get access to some of those supports that some of the schools that do have it are able to make some higher level referrals for supports for students, that we expand those services in those schools. So I know Rochelle can speak a little bit more about it, but we are in the process of starting that new this year for several of our schools, and we can do a follow-up on this at a later time, where we are able to provide through that grant at the schools more direct mental health support services that we as educators are not able to support because it is not within the realm of our work, but we're able to refer out, and we're really trying to see if that referral that could happen within the school is more it directly benefits students best because it's sort of timely and it's in their school environment day. So it's a new grant that we are piloting in several of our schools. So I'm looking forward to really unpacking that and seeing if that's a model that we need to figure out how to expand.
I appreciate that. Yep. Like I said, for me, a lot of this is about the consistency and making sure that kids feel that we're trying to remove the stigma of having conversations around mental health. That's how this all evolved, and it all came from the students. I will say Ms. Tataconda had put together a fabulous student panel forum that we had at Julius West, and I would like to, as a follow-up from Ms. Suskin, to work with our current student board member and see about putting together another one of those this year. I think that would be, we learn more from hearing directly from our students what they feel is working and what they're still searching for best by hearing from our students. So
At the fair, where would that be?
we can discuss, yeah. Well, I was gonna say we can work with Dr. Navarro to, as I said, it'd be good.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Ms. Mondrowski, finally, the committee had requested a update on the concentration of poverty schools, specifically talking about the community schools. And so I just wanted to provide a verbal update on this and see if there's any additional questions that you'd like me to follow up on. So briefly, if you recall, this spring, Senate Bill 1030, the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, was approved, and in it was a body of work around supporting and beginning to start community schools. And as defined, they looked at schools in the state that based on the 17-18 school year had a 80% fund rate or higher. And to that extent, 8 schools were identified based on that year for Montgomery County Public Schools, and those were Joanne Lelick at Broad Acres, Shriver Elementary, Highland, Wheaton Woods, Harmony Hills, New Hampshire States, Gaithersburg, and South Lake. At the time, around July, the state released the funds to be able to begin all the streams of work under the Senate bill, but specifically in terms of this one, for the community school concept. We brought in, so the bill itself called for, it defined community schools with a multitude of different areas, starting with how to think about community schools as they support academic interventions during the school day, after school, also the wraparound services for students, how those are supported. And it also included other areas around how to support parent education and engagement and opportunities for students to be supported through the wraparound services both during the day and after school, and gave some additional areas of emphasis. It also called for schools to ensure that they had in their, they had health practitioners, primarily for us, those are school nurses, but schools that didn't have a full-time coverage for that could use the funding to be able to do that, to be able to offset that coverage to make sure they had full-time coverage in that area.
So I just want to clarify, so our school nurses are different than like a health room aide, for example.
Yes.
They can prescribe, I mean, not maybe prescribe anything for anybody, but they can do
a little bit higher level of care, and the bill specifically talked about 4 areas of it: an RN, an LPN, a physician assistant, and they would even schools could be allowable to even do it for an MD, for a doctor. And so those where the funding was first and foremost to offset any costs in a school where that wasn't a full-time position at some level. For our schools, all 8 of them, all but 3 already had a full-time nurse allocation from HHS. So those 3 schools all had to offset the cost, first and foremost, of making sure they had full-time coverage.
I don't mean to cut you off, but just really, so some of those schools, like Gaithersburg Elementary School, have a health,
a school
a wellness center.
a wellness
center.
School-based health.
Right, yes, a school-based wellness center. So they see families, correct?
Yes.
So would all of these 8 qualifying schools with the full-time health care person also see families in terms of?
So the way the law had it was for the coverage of the school day. So it was during the school day, and so primarily, it doesn't specify that it can't cover families, but it seems to specify that it wants to make sure the coverage of the students during the school hours, the school day is there. That's not to say, by the way, that, so as I go through this process of how they made some decisions, schools could also expand beyond the minimum requirement, which some of our schools chose to do. So the other requirement that they had to meet was also to have a school-based community coordinator. For us, it's the title is actually a community schools liaison. And that position, their role is to do a needs assessment for all the components that were outlined in Senate Bill 1030, and to support, obviously, the beginnings of the work around the multiple areas of community schools. Each school received a funding amount of $248,833 for a period of 2 years. We wanted to make sure, because as the name calls it, community schools, we wanted to make sure that we first met with the principals and talked and explained to them the requirements of the Senate bill, And then we met with the principals and multiple community stakeholders. The PTAs joined us. Health and Human Services joined us in a meeting. Our union leaders joined us in a meeting. And we wanted to make sure that everybody understood what this work was going to entail in terms of the community schools. And then we asked principals to take the lead and go back to their communities, knowing the primary requirements that they had to fill, and talk to their communities. Their communities could be made up of nonprofit organizations, faith-based organizations. All of these schools are tied to linkages to learning. They're all linkages to learning sites. So the director of the linkages to learning, and bring back up to us a proposal of what they would want to use the funding for, obviously focusing on their requirements first. Overwhelmingly, every single one of our schools, after they put the funding aside that they needed to for the coordinating community liaison position and any additional makeups that they had to do for their health suite coverage, overwhelmingly every single one of our schools requested additional hours for mental health support through the linkages of learning sites. So we, in the month of September, in August, they met with their communities. In the month of September, they submitted their proposals. And we've been working through we brought in the DHHS to work with us for the nursing coverage as well as the additional supports for mental health ask. But schools also asked for additional pieces. Some schools had additional funds and they asked for additional support. Some of the schools chose to expand to add more parent community coordinators so they can do some more parent education supports. They also requested additional supports for mental health supports that could happen during the school day, not just after school. Wraparound trauma-informed training for their teachers, which is allowable under the grant. So we are in the process of finalizing all of the budgets, but everybody's gotten the green light to hire staffing to begin the programmatic support. So we're looking at October as a time when all of the staffing is hired so the programmatic pieces can begin. And we are required to bring to the board, an update that we will be coming forward before December 1st, because we have to submit an update on the categorical expenditures for everything around Senate Bill 1030 before December 1.
So it will have a breakdown of who requested which type of use for the supports and what they were.
Yes, and we actually have that now. It's just that we are finalizing the salary adjustments. Some schools, based on who they hire, and these are all average salaries, but based on who they hire, they may have funding left over that they can go back and add additional hours for their contractual services through the linkages of learning sites for mental health supports, or they may want to do more professional learning. So we're tying that up so that we can give you sort of a finalized budget based on actuals and not just.
And this is a 2-year commitment, and all 8 of the schools that qualify already have linkages to learning.
All of them have linkages to learning. Not all of them have school-based health centers. All but 3 have school-based health centers.
Okay, and the cutoff is 80% farm rate.
80 or higher for school year 17-18, and then also if the legislation continues, and Ms. Suskind is my partner in crime in following up on this, there could be a wave of 18-19 schools that may be different from this list, and for us some might be that come at the 80% or higher that would have right now 1 year of funding, perhaps 2, depending on what the new legislation.
What happens if one of the schools falls below 80%?
It doesn't matter. It is guaranteed for 2 years because that was the point in time when they made the decision.
And then we'll reevaluate how that is going and if it's a best practice, and potentially start looking at doing that, expanding it even on our own. Like, I know that there are schools, I don't know exactly, like Twinbrook, for example, I don't know what their farm rate specifically is, but.
It was below 80 at the time we did the 17-18 school year. Look, but one of the things that is important is that the role of that community liaison for us is also this year to do a deep dive analysis of all aspects, because with the funding that we received, it's a kickstart, but other schools that also receive this funding may not have the infrastructures that we already have with the concept of linkages to learning and school-based health centers in other jurisdictions. So the coordinators, the community liaisons' role this year is also to look at all aspects that are outlined on the bill and do a needs assessment, a current state and a needs assessments for each of these schools.
Yeah, I have a question. The community school coordinator, I mean, $248,000 is not a lot of money. Did you hire a new person, or did you take someone already in the building and allot that position to them?
No.
I mean, I'm trying to figure out how they ended up with extra money.
So we estimated a salary plus benefits around maybe, I've got to go back and figure out, but there was enough funding that you could hire somebody. Our schools also, because we have parent community coordinators, because we have the linkages to learning coordinators, they did have some flexibility if they hired a 1.0 or a 0.5. We talked about that because of the wraparound supports. These are also Title I schools, so they have beefed up different staff around that support some of the student wraparound services in the schools. But most schools that had to purchase a coordinator and some supports to their health suites had a little bit left over for additional. I believe every single school actually put in dollars for additional mental health. That was the number one thing that the principals were very clear their community's number one ask through linkages to learning. So we are doing the contracts through HHS that manages the linkages to learning to expand
Okay,
those.
so the school coordinator is not a contract position?
No, it's an MCPS position.
Okay, that's full, okay. That answers it, thank you.
So, as Dr. Navarro's partner in crime, I can give you a little update on where this is right now. The commission met on Tuesday, and this is new, fresh information. And there is a component in the new plan that would be called the Concentration of Poverty Grant. It would be all schools 55% of farms and over. You would be guaranteed, if you're 55% and over, you would be guaranteed the 2 positions Dr. Navarro mentioned for up to 3 years, even if your status changed. And then there is a per pupil amount, the max being any schools over 80% would get $3,265 per student. And then that is scaled based on your percentage below 80%. So a school at 55% would not get any per pupil amount, but would get the 2 positions for 3 years. Schools starting at about 65% would get a portion of that funding per pupil in addition to the 2 positions for 3 years.
So then what happens at the end of 3 years? Because then they're in our maintenance of effort.
No, the $260,000+ that were received through a state grant.
But you said they were
248
MCPS employees, the school coordinator.
So any position that we put through here, like we do for other grants, because we received a whole bunch of grants, in the position description, we said that they would be 2-year positions. And then, for example, one of our schools decided to hire, they had enough money to hire a social worker, and we will be happy to absorb that social worker because we're always looking for social workers into MCPS. I mean, it's just one of those pieces. But we are very much following along to see what that actually could mean. But the staffing, I think that is MCPS staffing, we don't have any concerns that will not be easily absorbed through.
That's what
It
I
might
was
be
concerned
going somewhere
about.
else, but they'll be
And
part of our system.
and the conversation now on concentration of poverty, the big decision that will be made next week is whether there will be a mandated local share for those concentration of poverty grants. So there's a couple of arguments back and forth, but that will also impact MOE because if there's no local share, then there's not a
doesn't
portion that
count
we're putting
towards,
in.
right.
Correct.
Exactly.
Bet there's gonna be more.
Yeah. So I have a question, and that it's just a clarifying question type of thing. If a school would like the linkages to learning, or has requested that we put in linkages to learning, is that something that we discuss during operating budget, or is it something that can be So I had suggested, and as a follow-up, I would be interested in seeing if the city of Rockville would be interested in working with MCPS to get a linkages to learning at Twin Brook, for example. That's, a request that the community has brought in. So how does something like that work?
So we have those conversations because the linkages to learning is coming from the Department of Health and Human Services, DHHS. We, and I think Ms. Suskin can follow up with my folks, we just generated a list with DHHS because historically the linkages to learning was based on farms rate, on thinking about where the next set of schools that don't currently have linkages to learning are. Twin Brook is on that list, and it is very kind of near to the next sites that have come up. It's not the only one. And then that is cross-referenced with the CIP process. Because of the fact that that expands all of our buildings, most of our buildings, all of our buildings are fully utilized. So it expands the capacity. How it has happened in the past historically is every time there's a CIP discussion, we then bring up the conversation of, is there an opportunity for any of those schools that are on the CIP process to be potentially sites for a linkages to learning model? We had a meeting on Monday with county council. The HHS committee and the education committee came together and gave an update on a couple of different areas. But one of the areas that we talked about is a request of joint work to look at multiple metrics that identify for us how do we support somatic and wellness health of youth in the county moving forward. One component of that is the linkages to learning site. Another one is obviously school-based health centers, mental wellness centers, at the high school as well as the local nurse clinics that are available to communities. So I'm happy to provide kind of an overview of what we discussed there. But there is a list that is right now generated that has farm rates and CIP projects and looks at that for a possible look at where the next set of potential expansions of linkages to learning sites should be. But I think the conversation MCPS and HHS are having as a result of the county asking this question is what should be the model as we move forward? Because we have different programs that serve different needs in terms of both the somatic and the wellness of students.
And all of our schools offer free vaccinations and things like that, is that correct? Or only our wellness centers?
So we have clinics that we have, and then what we've made available, especially for our middle schools, is we've brought the clinics to the middle schools where we have a need for kids to catch up with their vaccinations. We have talked previously, by the way, with HHS, and we're looking to see if we can get this off the ground about also looking at some pilot schools where we may start offering the flu vaccinations for students and looking at how to do that through the Department of Health, because that will be something that is, it's common in other jurisdictions actually in the state. So we need to catch up.
Okay. Excellent. Ms. Wolf, did you have any other questions or anything? Right now, I'm very excited about this, by the way. I think this is a very fantastic initiative, and I really hope that we can figure out some best practices and some things that we can see a difference, and make that be something that we can expand throughout our system, because we do have so many needs, even if sometimes people aren't aware of how great that they are. So, so thank you very much for this update. I appreciate it. And with that, I think that is pretty well our agenda. So unless anyone else has anything that they would like to add at the table here? No? All right, then. I will call us adjourned. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all so much for coming. Appreciate it.